you won't miss anything because I'm going to cover it all for you.
That's really thoughtful of you.
Well, I just wanted to, that was the right point. I mean, big things were happening in her life in the last book, and I thought, well, that would be cheating not to show people what happened after that.
So when you have a series character, they generally have a tortured romantic life. Not always, but bad things happen. You put her through 2 or 3 evolutions.
Sure, she changes, and sure, she goes through some sad things and some bad things. But I don't think I've tormented her nearly as much as I've tormented my other protagonists.
That's one way to look at it. How do you guys vote? Do you think she's had a fairly easy ride? Show of hands? Yes? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe that's even a license for you to go dark.
Yeah, I don't think I'll ever go really do something awful to Ro. My other protagonists, I would come to a point and I would say, oh, that's too bad to do. I just can't do it. But I'm going to. Because the big drama is what draws people back into the story, I think.
So tell us just enough to get us into this story, but not too much.
Okay. Aurora's half-brother, Philip, is still living with Aurora and Robin. They have just gotten married when the book opens because, as you know, a little baby is on the way, and Aurora is very traditional, and so is Robin in that respect. So they get married. But then, just when she's thinking she can just roll in the joy of being pregnant, at I think she's 38, her brother vanishes, along with his best friend's twin, and a 9-year-old girl. And no one can understand why such a clump of young people have vanished. They start looking for them, obviously very intensively. At the last known spot where the kids stopped, they find a body. And it is not one of the missing kids, it is someone completely different. So Aurora is very anxious, naturally, to find out where her brother is. Her dad comes into town and really is just a big, unpleasant person. And she has to deal with him. She has to deal with, well, she always has to deal with her mother. She has to deal with lots of things in addition to being pregnant and wanting to get her brother home for Christmas. So, big problems.
And reasonable goals.
Yes, yes.
So in this current wave of domestic suspense, have all of you rushed out to see The Girl on the Train? Yeah. Okay, so we have this, we sort of went from the era of Suki, in fact, in Big Paranormal, to domestic suspense, which basically translates to everybody that you know or whom you love actually wants to kill you. It's not my favorite genre because I don't really like thinking about, the people near to me in that regard. But, I thought you handled it gracefully, and there's, without giving anything away, your book doesn't go where it might go if that were in fact the drama that we were.
Oh, that's not the story I'm telling with her. Those books have unreliable narrators.
True.
And I have not.
Many of them, yes.
Yeah. I have not gotten into unreliable narrators, and I don't think I ever will, because I feel like you have to have someone you trust in the books. At least I do. The books I like, I want to be able to trust the voice of the narrator to be telling me the truth.
Back in like 1991, I don't even remember the name of the author. She was from Seattle and she kind of disappeared. But she wrote a book that really shocked everybody because at the end, the cop turned out to be the bad guy, meaning he was an unreliable investigator, the whole 9 yards.
Georgette Heyer wrote a blunt instrument, and
Well, that's true.
same thing.
Yeah, but now, half the time when you pick up a book, you're pretty sure that law enforcement's actually gonna turn out to be, the bad guys are certainly not on your team.
Yeah.
Or they're gonna be spending a lot of time butting heads, and it'll all be about jurisdiction instead of actually investigating. And I think, that's a different version of the unreliable narrator. But you don't run into that when you're dealing with people who aren't formally in law enforcement, right?
No, but law enforcement is brought in every time,
Has to be.
especially in this book because it's kidnapping, and the FBI almost always comes in if the kidnapped person is under 15.
Well, or if it goes across state. Sue tells a really funny story when she wrote K, which turns out to be for killer. Originally, it was going to be K as for kidnapping. But then she worked it out. After she written 180 pages, the Kinsey Mello and Private Eye couldn't work a kidnapping case because, in fact, it's an FBI case. So she had to throw away 180 pages and start over. And it's always remained with me, that you have to remember what crimes your people
Yeah.
can actually not only investigate, but arrest or bring to justice when they solve it. So,
This is true.
yeah, did that be? It wasn't really a question, it was just an observation of thinking about it. So what is it you think you're you're talking about 2 more for her, but do you have any other ideas for books or any other news about books?
I do have an idea for a totally new series that I really, really, really want to write, and my agent and I thought that we were all set with the publisher, but we're having serious contract issues. And luckily for me, I'm in a position where I can walk. I don't have to put up with a bad contract. So that may be what we do. So I don't know if I'll get to write those books or not. This is the first time in 16 years that I don't have a writing schedule for the next 2 years. And it's just, I keep dawdling on finishing the book I'm writing now, the next Aurora, because I don't have anything to write after that, and I'm just really, anxious.
That's interesting, because I would have thought in some ways that'd be liberating, but maybe it's not.
Not to me.
Not if you're a working writer.
Yeah, I work a lot. I work all the time, every day usually. And it just makes me nuts not to have a project ready and waiting for me.
I'm sure one will come up.
I try to say, oh, I'm not going to have any problem. I've sold a lot of books. But, that didn't keep me from getting cut a time or two.
Well, let's be optimistic, and we'll look forward to Roe, and then we'll look forward to, if not the one you particularly want to write, I'm sure some other idea will come along that you will be able to write.
Well, it always has so far.
Right.
And I just have to keep hoping that the wellspring that keeps supplying me with ideas has not run dry yet.
I can see you writing right into the edge of the grave. Since we're talking about that. I'll bet you all have lots of questions that you would like to ask Charlaine, so why don't we throw it open and see how we do?
So you said that you had a contract to write 3 Aurora Tea Garden books? Two. So do you have to have a contract in order to write them, or can you just say to your publisher, I'd like to continue beyond those 2?
Charlaine, can you repeat
Sure.
the question?
She wants to know if it's necessary to have a contract before you write a book. If you're writing a book without a contract, that's on spec. And you may be spending your time and efforts on a book that the publisher will not buy. My time has been so accounted for the past few years that it has never occurred to me to write a book on spec, because I haven't had any trouble having contracts. The contracts give you a deadline. The deadline motivates me tremendously to finish the book. I think that's probably what my problem is right now. I don't have a set deadline. This book just came out, so there's no big pressure on me to turn in the next one.
Some authors don't ever write on it. P.D. James never had a contract. She wrote every one of her books and then took it to her publisher in the hopes that they would buy it. which they did. But it would be discouraging to spend the time to write a book and
Oh,
then
yeah.
discovered that, you know, it wasn't going to be published, although there are many more avenues to publishing now. So you do have choices that didn't exist 20 years ago.
I would just think that you're so popular that how could they say no?
You would think, that would be true.
It's a mystery.
You would think since I have sold 30 million books, that anyone would be happy to buy my work. Well, better think again.
Another question. We've rendered you all speechless, right? Now, there's questions over here.
So, I really only am familiar with the Suki books
Mhm.
and the Lily Bard books.
Mhm.
So I'd like to know a little bit more about you. How did you get into writing? Was it, like, I'm a painter, so a lot of it's emotional.
Uh-huh.
Is that the same for writers?
Well, for this writer, she wants to know how I got into writing. That's all I ever wanted to do. That was always my secret identity. You know, some kids are, you know, Superwoman or Wonder Woman or the Flash or whatever, but I was always Writer Woman, but nobody knew it. So I wrote a little bit for many, many years, but when I was working regular jobs, which I did very badly, I really didn't have the energy to write, which is, you know, that's not good because I really wanted to. But when I married my current husband of 38 years, he said, why don't you stay home and write full time? So he threw down the gauntlet. It was put up or shut up time. And so I wrote a book.
Well, let's shake his hand.
You know, he's pretty happy now. Though for many years, you know, I made about that much money. Our accountant said, you know, if you had more children, you could qualify for welfare. And I said, well, but I have a living husband. This would not work.
What was that first book?
The first book I wrote was called Sweet and Deadly, which is, you know, pretty bad title. It was published by Houghton Mifflin. Had a good cover. Did moderately well. They took my next book, A Secret Rage, a standalone. And then I took a 5-year hiatus, which you should never, ever do in publishing.
Right.
Because you're just gone. Because I was having babies. And I had 2. And I thought, I just have to write again. It was making me crazy not writing. So I got an agent. After a long phone conversation with a friend of mine's agent, I hired him. His name is Joshua Bilmes. He is still my agent, which is some kind of record. And I started writing again, and it was very hard to get back into being a published writer again after that hiatus, because that made them think I was unreliable.
Okay. And plus, you just get forgotten.
You do, especially with just 2 books. It was easy to forget who I was, sadly.
So even as a writer, you face the same challenges that other stay-at-home moms face whenever they want to go back to work.
I do. Other stay-at-home moms have exactly the same battle to write. I just have a slightly different occupation.
Yeah.
When the teacher asked my son what I did, he told her that I was a house cleaner. Because that was all he ever saw me do. He never saw me writing, because I had to wait till he was gone.
I was just curious, when you had written those initial books, was it under that name, or was it Charlaine Harris? Is that your pen name, or when you first started writing, was it a different name? And then when your book started to gain popularity, did you change the name?
No, this is the name I originally was published under. It's my maiden name, or as I think of it, my real name. So.
I just started the Aurora Tea Garden series. I've read the first one. You haven't spoiled anything for me. But do you consider reading your books in order, or can you skip around?
Oh, I think with the Aurora books, her story has gotten so complicated that it would be really a good idea to read them in order, or this book will necessarily squash a surprise or two that you will want to encounter in the right order. It just had to. I mean, there was no way I could not mention some of the things that have happened to her in the past. So that's my best advice.
I was just curious, you said Midnight Texas miniseries is coming in February. What station or what?
NBC, and
NBC?
it's not a
Okay.
mini-series, it's
Okay.
a complete series. We
Complete
hope
series.
anyway. I hope it's not gonna be a mini-series because they're counting on it being a full season.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah,
Okay, so NBC, nice.
yeah, I'm in a major network now.
What is that? The Midnight?
Well, that's a series of books I wrote, 3 books that I've worked on for the past, I guess, 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that,
Are you writing more than that?
well, amazingly, my publisher has not asked me to write more.
That's before TV.
Wow.
Yeah, so truthfully, I told him I just wanted to write 3 books, in all honesty, because I could not get pinned down to another long series like I did with Suki. I just couldn't even bear the thought.
Yeah, you wrote more Sookies than anything else.
Mhm, I
Uh-huh.
did. And I enjoyed it.
Right.
But when I signed the contract for the last 3 Suki novels, I thought, this is it. And I knew it was time to bring her story to a close. When you're about to start a book and you don't go, yay, I get to start a book, and you just go, you know it's time to wind things down. So I did.
There's a lady back there.
The Midnight Texas, are they gonna cover the first book in the first season, or are they gonna, how are they gonna break that up?
Well, having seen the pilot, they're going to have elements of all 3 books kind of running alongside each other.
Okay.
And I'm not really sure how that's going to, evolve, but they can't. I have the luxury of dribbling little bits of information all through the books. They're going full tilt
Okay,
because they have to grab people like that.
so how much are they gonna change it? Cause I know with the True Blood,
It's
the
changed
end
a
of the
little
end of
bit.
the first season kind of threw me off.
Surprise, surprise, the only full-figured woman in there is Skinny. Okay. I was stunned, I tell you.
I'm gonna check with Mr. Trump for casting.
Oddly enough, she plays the witch Fiji. I don't know how many of you have read those books. Fiji has a cat. This actress is violently allergic to cats.
No.
I know. So the first scene they were shooting, she was carrying the cat in a basket. And of course the cat did not like being in the basket and would immediately jump out. So they asked her, okay, you have to carry the cat. And she said, well, if you see me putting my hands up to my face, yell, don't do it. Because evidently she would have a pretty strong reaction. So the cat kept jumping out of her arms. So they put tuna on her sweater. Really? Really? Well, I did feel pretty sorry for her at that point. And the cat started eating her sweater.
This is TMI, guys. This sort of ruins the magic.
I mean, you may think acting is easy, but I'm here to tell you, it is not. It is not. They have to do the same thing over and over and over and over with just minor changes in attitude or speech. And honestly, I would just throw something at the director the 12th time he asked me to do something over. So that's why it's like I'm a letter.
Oh, yeah, you don't have to wear tuna. What could be better than that? Yes, ma'am.
Before my question, I'd like to thank you personally for Lily Bard.
Thank you.
She's very personal to me, I really turn her. But as far as the Suki Stackhouse books, I love all the books, but I had a hard time watching the show because it is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Were you able to watch the show in complete?
She had trouble watching the TV show, the Suki TV show. Well, I will tell you the way I feel about that. I like Alan Ball very much. I think he is a genius. He went absolutely in his own direction because he is a very politically oriented guy. And so the stories changed and changed and changed. I will never say anything bad about that show to anyone because it did me so much good, because I have a freeze frame all on my own in the credits from the books by Charlaine Harris. And boy, that really, really worked in terms of my bank account. So I'm going, yay, Alan Ball.
Have you heard Craig Johnson tell his story about that?
Oh, no,
It's wonderful. You know, Craig Johnson writes the Longmire books, and so Longmire is now a TV series, the most popular one on A&E, and showing how well that worked. They dropped him, so he got taken up by Netflix, which made him much more popular. But anyway, he was on tour somewhere, and he went into a bar, and he was wearing a Longmire cap, if I have this story right. And the woman looked at him, and she said, why are you wearing the cap? And he said, well, I'm not Walt Longmire, obviously, she said. And he said, I'm wearing the cap because I'm the author. I write that series. And she looked at him and she said, oh, there are books? And that's kind of how it is
That's
in
how it
TV
is.
land, you know, is that, in fact, I was thinking about that. We were watching Inspector Lewis the other night. When I opened this store in 1989, I could hardly give away a Colin Dexter book. People just didn't care about, you know, Morse and Oxford and whatever. Then he won the Gold Dagger for his historical one, the name of which is slipping me, but anyway. And he got more pop, and then they decided to do the television. And the magic of the television is not so much Morse, but Oxford, which is one of the most interesting, you know, gorgeous photograph, the whole 9 yards. And just think about it. John Thaw died, but now there's the prequel to Morse, which is called, what is it, Kathy and Deborah? That's the young Morse. That was the secret revealed in like the last Morse book. Then there's been Inspector Lewis. There was Morse, Inspector Lewis, and now there's another one and so forth. In other words, this whole thing has had a life of its own based on a very few novels. And people used to come in after watching some of the episodes when it was just Morse, and they would say to me, I want to buy that book. And I'd say, it's not a book. They just made it up. He did that. So the midnight thing, in answer to your question, if they can go off and they can
we thrashed that out.
by Charlaine Harris. But the truth is, you know, they can go off and do, and if you're lucky, you might turn into Morse, you know, with multiple generations
Yeah,
of
that would
things.
be,
It just depends
Yeah, it
on the
does.
audience fancy and, you know, the whole bit.
I will tell you an interesting sidelight to Longmire.
Okay.
When I went to visit the midnight where they were filming, it was in the same
Oh, Mexico.
I said, yeah, Las Vegas, New Mexico.
That's right.
And there was the Absaroka County police car parked in front of the police department on the square in Las Vegas, and you went 2 blocks over, and there was a police car from my fictional. How many actual police they have in Las Vegas, but they have a lot of fictional ones.
That's because New Mexico came up with a terrific subsidy, you know, for movie companies, which is why. But here's the other thing about Las Vegas, New Mexico, that might figure into this. It's the home of Scientology. That's their headquarters.
Yeah, that ties right
people.
in.
Right? No, it actually is. It really is. Scientology along my
I want to.
You know how Stan Lee makes a cameo in all of the comic book movies? Have you ever thought about doing something like that in your series that you picked up?
I did.
You did?
Yeah. I'm in at least 2 episodes of True Blood.
Must have been
All my
pretty
children are in True Blood.
Okay.
Yeah. My daughter-in-law was 8 months pregnant, so they put her behind a bar table. So you couldn't see, that would look kind of unhealthy. My daughter was a sadistic nurse in the last season. Except when she got on set, they made her wear pantyhose and heels, and she's not that kind of gal. So she was tormented all day. They did her. Finally, they filmed her scene after, and they never showed her from the waist down.
That's cruel.
It is cruel for her anyway.
Since we're on the topic of Suki, I feel like you're probably still sick of it. People asking, but were you there when they filmed the final episode?
Yes,
You were
I was
there?
in the final
Yeah.
episode.
Oh,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's right. That's right.
I was there. I listened to that scene between Bill and Eric. Approximately, sort of tiny change of emotion and movement.
How much
Oh.
change is there? Like, is there improv? Was there a lot of improv when you'd watch on the?
No, pretty much.
After Alan Ball left season 5, right?
Yeah.
Was that hard for you when he left? Because he was like your original, like.
Nope.
Nope.
It wasn't hard for me. I just feel like I got my good out of the show, and I watched it, and I didn't disrespect it, but I had, the show had become so independent
Yeah.
of anything I'd ever written by that time. I thought,
Yeah.
it
It's
lives or
barely
dies.
independent. Yeah.
What about the Aurora Tea Garden movies? What do you think of those? Or, 'cause I I like the book better.
Well, thank God.
Yeah.
I tell you what, those movies are very competent adaptations of the book. Because they are fitting the Hallmark demographic, which I knew. And let me say, my mother-in-law is the happiest woman in the world because she is the exact demographic, and she loves it. She's just happy as Clem.
Precise. Very,
Yeah,
very precise.
fairly precise is
Right.
kind of
What's
an
it called?
understatement.
Lifetime or life? What do they call it?
It's Hallmark movies and mystery, yeah.
Okay.
And they film in Vancouver, which is why it does not look much like Georgia.
They were very smart up there. Rob and I were there some years ago, and they were just finishing one of their very big sound stages. Until when movies were silent, that's when they could make them in California or here in Arizona. You remember? There was a movie thing down towards Tucson that burned.
Old Tucson is still there.
Yeah,
They
but
rebuilt it.
Did they rebuild it?
Yes, they rebuilt it. You can still go there.
Oh, okay. But anyway, they could film outdoors before talkies. Noise wasn't a problem, so they could go. But
Still not.
Things go bad.
how things.
Yes.
One of my favorite parts of the Midnight. I was curious since we didn't get to see Quinn play. ABC's take on Midnight Texas.
Any of the characters that were in True Blood. So I ended up being very happy that they never put Quinn in the show because that left him free for me. And I thought, oh good, because who doesn't like a good war tiger, right? So I'm keeping my fingers crossed, and it might. He did romance book covers, productions of those. Wow, you like details, don't you?
The devil's in the details.
It is.
She's an artist, she already said that. Lady over there.
Okay. Yeah, well, do you have any really crazy ideas that you kind of wanted to write as art? Either as a short story or something, maybe be a good time to do something to kind of get a fresh approach this book.
Maybe if I ever got used to that, that would be fun, not having a deadline. But right now, it's just a source of anxiety to me. I know Margaret Maron doesn't want to have a deadline anymore either, and I respect that. Connie Willis is a great writer too.
She is.
She is. So is Margaret. But I'll tell you what I'd like to write now. I don't know how many of you read Shirley Jackson.
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to see 100% nods on that because she is a great American writer, a great writer. She died way too soon, but she wrote the scariest book in the world. It's called The Haunting of Hill House, and no matter how many times I've read it, it still scares the bejesus out of me.
It's getting a big republishing this fall, and there is a biography of Shirley Jackson, if I'm not mistaken, that is just come out, maybe. Also one I'm happy to say of Josephine Tay, one of my
super.
favorite writers. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I like reading about writers. Do you all like doing that, reading lives of writers? And, you know, so there's an interest. And John Le Carre, by the way, just published an absolutely fabulous book called The Pigeon Tunnel. And what happened there is he agreed to let a man write a biography of him. And when he read it, he thought, I could tell my own stories better than this. So he decided he would write an autobiography of sketches. But the remarkable thing about it, I've written this in our newsletter, his father was, it's hard to explain how disastrous his father was. He was a con man, he was an adulterer, he was you know, you name it, he was. And possibly also a spy, because Lecrae was, his real name is David Cornwell, was a spy for a while too, before reaction to his father. And he has this very long essay at the end of it in which he outlines his father completely clearly, and his mother who walked out when he was 5 years old. And there is not one word of bitterness in the entire chapter. It's almost as though he's grateful to them for giving him so much material to write about, because, you know, writers don't necessarily, you're an exception, I think, but maybe you've had some of this too, don't necessarily have had happy lives, because sometimes your own life. I recommend any of you have issues with your parents, you should really read The Pigeon. I really love it. It's just now published, so it's given me a whole new insight into, you know, into his work, having read that, because obviously there's a great deal of him in his novels. No, remarkable. Yeah. Yes.
I read all your books in order. I had to read them in order.
Yes.
One of my favorite series is the Harper Conley series with The Grave. And I was so disappointed there were just 4 books and then it was done. And I guess there won't be any others unless a publisher comes to you and says he'd like more. And that was written so long ago that.
They still have the rights though.
Do you ever feel like I'm not done? Maybe I'd like to look at this again and go to a publisher and say, hey, I'd like to pick this up.
Well, if I ever have a great idea for Harper Conley, I would like to write another one. Because I think there's a little more to say about
I
her.
do too.
And I think
agree.
An Ice Cold Grave was probably, I still think, oh, I did it right with that one.
Yeah.
You know, some books really fall short. You try and try and try. But sometimes they still never match what you intended them to be. But An Ice Cold Grave did, exactly.
Why? Why did it matter?
Because I told a story with a certain ruthlessness about the characters and what happened to them. It was a grim story. I don't think I made it any grimmer than it had to be, but it was a grim story, and it was ultimately about a father and son, really, was the bottom line on that. I just felt really proud of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's one way back there.
Hi. I was actually
My favorite, you know, because I feel like she was my first series on her, and I just feel really close to her. She's more like me than any of my other protagonists. As far as a secondary character, I like Pam. You know, because she is totally ruthless, and that is so interesting to write.
Yeah, beautiful. But Alice in Wonderland was so ruthless, and I said Pam.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing.
Anybody else? Yes.
How do you get set in the mood for when you start writing something? Like, what hits you in? Do you have to be in a different mood? Like, if you're writing something happy or something sad or terrifying, or do you have to be set in the mood, or do you just go with it?
I just go
start
with
going?
it. Maybe when I was first starting out, I needed props to help me, I don't know, feel the mood, but now I just go for someone. Now, it's just like that.
How do you write? Has it changed? Did you start out writing by hand and then, or typewriter, or do you prefer computer, or what?
What's the physical method by which I write?
There you go.
I started out on an electrical typewriter that my husband gave me for a wedding present.
Really?
Yes,
He just really
really.
wanted you to write.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He wanted to encourage me and give me all the tools I needed, and that gave me a golden chance, Then I switched to computer. It makes it so much easier to produce a clean copy for editors. There was nothing worse than trying to type an entire clean copy and send it to your editor. Oh my gosh, it was terrible, terrible.
But you couldn't really move stuff around with any means.
And, oh yeah, you can move big blocks of stuff around. It's just, the computer is great. You know, you won't ever catch me sitting in a barn writing longhand. I have a friend who
It's very interesting. Did you ever handle where the
disputes with editors. If it's something really, really important to me, I stick to my guns because it's my book. But most often, I think my editor knows what he or she is talking about because she's been in the business and she knows editing. So usually I comply with whatever they ask me to do. Not 100%, but like 95% yes.
So are you a plotter or are you by the seat of your pants for writing?
Seat of my pants for sure. I have never, well, I tried outlining one time because so many of the writers I knew outlined, but honestly it was like painting by numbers. It just wasn't fun. Besides, I had to go ahead and think of everything I was going to do. I might as well just write the book. Yes, sir.
You know, some authors have mentioned that they have trouble keeping track of their characters when they write multiple series. And you have so many series and so many characters. What do you do, or do you just really easily pull just from memory?
What do I do about remembering all the characters in my books? This is a huge problem. It was not such a problem until Sookie started going into many, many editions. And people started writing me and saying, did you know you made a mistake on page 91? And I was going, you know, you're just the 300th person who told me about that. Thank you. Because by that time, you can't call the book back. I mean, you know, okay, there's a mistake in it. But I felt bad about it because it does yank people out of the narrative. So I hired a wonderful woman named Victoria Koski, and Victoria is my memory chip. She produced a whole Bible, as it's called, for me, and if I have a quick question, she always knows the answer. She's just amazing. And I just, you know, she saved my life, really. Yeah.
When you're writing your characters, do you always have a clear cut where they're going, or do they have a life of their own and they kind of tell you where they're going? They draw their own path.
I call that the schizophrenic theory of writing. When your characters tell you where they're going. But I've heard lots of writers say that. It's really not true they do. That would be so weird. But I think when you're an experienced writer, you recognize that you've gone in the wrong direction with a character, and your writer brain tells you it's not going to work and you need to do something else. I would certainly prefer to believe that it was my own will rather than a character telling me.
However, can I interject without mentioning any names, that occasionally a writer has fallen in love with a character and only the writer really loves this character and the rest of us wish it would die.
I'm the original starter of the Kill Jessica Club for Harlan Coben, and he really liked her, and I'm going, "Bleh. She's terrible, kill her, come on, do something with her, get her out of the picture."
Now, all I meant is that sometimes writers fall in love with a character, for their own reasons, but it doesn't mean that the reader is necessarily going to pick up the same enthusiasm. And boy, that goes back to your question, what are editors for? Sometimes editors are for say, we're done, or, do something, or maybe that's not clear. I had a long discussion today with an author from Australia. We're doing an interesting thing. She's published 7 books in Australia. But the deal was that if I bought the series for Poison Pen Press, that she would revise them because there's some things in them weren't going to work that Americans would have a hard time understanding. So originally I thought it would just be minor things, because I don't like translating. I think that if you're going to read Harry Potter, you should be able to keep up with the English language, the English language, and you don't need Scholastic translating it into American for you. But anyway, today, when I got through, I wrote her and I said, I haven't asked you to do this before, but in this book, here are things that I think need more work. And when she wrote back, she said, blah, 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 and I said, this is one of those cases where it's clear in your head, but it didn't make it onto paper. And that often happens in a book, because so often I'll say to a writer, why is so-and-so? Why is this person behaving that way? And they always tell me. And then I say, well, then why did you write it down? And so, that's a whole nother
Editors come in
question.
handy.
Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, as somebody saying, I just, clarify this for me, or make it. And sometimes that causes, I think, writers to rethink things. I find this interesting because these books have already been published. So,
Oh, yeah.
normally, if you buy something that's already been published somewhere else, you just publish it like it is. But we agreed that we wouldn't do that, and so this is kind of a very odd process. And I'm very careful to say to her, it's just it's totally up to you. You don't have to do this, but it would be better if you could. And so we kind of go that way. Has that happened to you, where editors have said to you, Charlaine, I'm not sure I understand this, or, could we have more explanation, or maybe you should cut this?
Every now and then that's happened to me when editors have suggested moving key blocks of information around or asked me to clarify something that to me was clear. Most often it depends on characters I want to kill. And editors thinking, oh, you shouldn't do that.
Save that one.
Yeah, people are really fond of that character, and I'm going, how do you know that? Maybe they're all just waiting for him to die.
On that note, I think we can't really top that. I think we should all thank Charlaine very much for coming. We both thank you for coming, and as an additional thank you, we generally give away a book not yet published, because I get advanced reading copies of books not yet out. This is my spare copy of the Patricia Cornwell, which does not mean I'm espousing Patricia Cornwell, but rather I have an extra copy I can give away. But that's what I'm going to do tonight. So, Patrick. Okay, Charlaine, if you would pick a number between 1 and 5, we can't really top that. I think we should all thank Charlaine very much for coming. We both thank you for coming, and as an additional thank you, we generally give away a book not yet published, because I get advanced reading copies of books not yet out. This is my spare copy of the Patricia Cornwell, which does not mean I'm espousing Patricia Cornwell, but rather I have an extra copy I can give away. But that's what I'm going to do tonight. So, Patrick. Okay, Charlaine, if you would pick a number between 1 and